Hello and welcome to the Fat Dad Fishing Show. My name is Rich Natoli, your regular host. And tonight I'm going to be joined by Captain Josh Pearson. And we're going to go through a lot of talk about fishing South Jersey. It's really going to apply across, different areas in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. But that's where he's fishing, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about multiple species, and I'm going to get there pretty quick tonight. I want to go through the customary acknowledgement of the sponsors of this live stream and podcast, and we're going to start off with Great Bay Outfitters, the kayak shop on Radio Road in Tuckerton. Great shop. They got everything that you need, and go on to Facebook and take a look at them. It's just Great Bay Outfitters on Facebook. They've got a Memorial Day sale coming up, and it's too much for me to list right here, right now, because I really want to jump into this really quick. But if you have a kayak, you definitely want to check it out. It's going to be a really solid sale coming up. But they got everything. Whether you have a need for a new kayak, or you need to sell a kayak, you can sell it through them. Kayak equipment, anything that you need, and fishing. Get your fishing rods, and you can get reels and everything there as well. And one of the best things that you can get is good intel for local information before you hit the water. So if you swing by there on your way to Great Bay, go in and talk to the guys in the shop, and they're always going to steer you right. They're going to tell you the truth of where to go. So you don't always get that. Sometimes you get the person that wants to be helpful, but they haven't been on the water. These guys are on the water, so they know exactly what to do. Next one is me as a real estate agent in southeastern Pennsylvania. Part of my team also covers New Jersey, have connections in Delaware, New York, Maryland, Virginia, whatever your needs are. If you have residential real estate needs, buying, selling, investing, please reach out to me, richardnatoli.com or richardnatoli@kw.com. And with that said, we're going to go right into this. I'm going to bring on stage right now Captain Josh Pearson. Welcome. It's great to see you.
Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone.
Go ahead.
Apologies. I didn't know I had to join YouTube to participate in the chat. So I am unable to respond to anyone in the chat.
Well, you can
texting.
You
can I can talk, but
you can't even do it through StreamYard?
No, I hit join chat, and it's making me log into YouTube, which I do not have a YouTube account.
Okay. But, well, the good news is you can just talk.
Yep.
And answer them, and it's all good. And I can throw up on screen any of the comments that you're reacting to, so that everybody can see what you're talking about and everything. We've got a few people in the chat already talking. What is that? Is that Smell Test?
I think I might know who that is.
Smell Test. All right, that's a good one. James Flynn, participation trophy fishing. Rob Woodmeyer, crabbing and fishing. So Benji's in there. Joker, Stephen Duda, Tad. And Covert Caster is in there too. So we got a bunch of people in there. We have more people here than are in the chat. So welcome everyone. So we're going to dive in. Let's start off. Why don't you just outline to everybody, where is it that you consider the normal areas that you're going to be out fishing with your clients?
So I live in Ocean View, New Jersey, but I fish out of Summers Point. I consider my home turf. From there, I'll go anywhere from Atlantic City down to Corson's, which are the areas I frequent probably about 90% of the time. There are 25% is probably down in Cape May, Stone Harbor, Avalon, those areas down there. But if I'm fishing for flounder, stripers, 90% of the time it's out of Summers Point area, Great Bay.
Okay. It's a great area to go too. I mean, it's a great area if you're going to go for those. And what are you targeting right now? I mean, let me take a step back. That's not the actual question. What if you didn't have clients? Would you personally be targeting right now if you just said, I'm just going to hit the water today and go fishing?
That would definitely be stripers.
Okay.
I enjoy flounder fishing, but striper fishing is by far more entertaining and slightly more difficult, which makes it more fun.
It's funny. I'm the opposite. I would fish for the fluke first or the flounder first. Striper, and then I go into the other ones. What's your order of species for May, June that you would target? So you start off with the striped bass.
Yep, striped bass. I'm fishing by myself or with buddies. Flounder second, then bluefish.
Okay.
I've been fishing a lot the past 2-3 weeks for stripers and blues, but it's been a grind. April was good, but May has not been so good. We're talking consistency.
Yeah, I've seen that it's fairly consistent up north for like the bluefish, for example. 10, 15 pounders are hitting some of the backwaters up there, but I haven't seen a lot south of like Manasquan River.
It's
You know,
been yeah, it's been hit or miss. We caught one that was probably mid 20s, so maybe like 7, 8 pounds, something like that.
yeah,
And we got into some cocktails about a week and a half ago, but other than that, it's been pretty uneventful on the bluefish front.
it's disappointing. There's nothing like the fight of a bluefish, if you ask me.
Definitely unlike last year. This time last year, they were all over the back bay. I mean, I think they were pretty isolated to one general area, but you can go out there and pretty much guarantee you're going to catch 4 or 5 of them, if not 20. If you
Yeah,
had bait pinned up against the sod banks.
I've got a couple of spots that, and whenever it's around Memorial Day, I mean, for 20 plus years, every year that I've been able to make it on the water, I've just gone to that spot or these three spots, and I've always caught decent bluefish. And the problem is, I've never found a consistent spot for the big bluefish in the backwaters.
Yep.
That's the tough thing.
I think they're just constantly moving.
Yeah.
And, you try and find bait, and then you find bait, you find fish. But unfortunately, the bait's there, but the bluefish aren't always there.
So what are you when you're going out to target bluefish? And I want to bring this up because this is probably, in my opinion, the best time of year to go after bluefish, especially in the backwaters or really up close. You're going to get the bigger bluefish if you can find them. They're going to be more bigger bluefish in close than later in the year. Just my opinion. What are you going to be doing what are you looking for? Like, what type of a spot are you going to be targeting? Are you looking on the flats? Are you looking for small channels? Is there a certain depth that you're looking for? Or are you just out there scouting and just putting in the miles?
I would say put in the miles, which I have been this year. Last year, I did not have to put in the miles because they were generally in the same area all the time. But I'm looking for
Yeah.
birds like white egrets, terns, diving. I find if you just have one white egret standing on the bank, or maybe a group of terns, like 4 or 5 terns, they're not going to be feeding like they do out front. You just don't see that in the back bay. But if you see,
Right.
a handful of terns diving, they're diving on small bait. So I'll go over there and poke around. And a lot of times, they're not going to be big bluefish, but you'll have more cocktails that you know what to do with.
Yeah. Well, and they're fun.
Yep, they are fun. The bigger blues has just been kind of luck of the draw. I caught a lot last year casting for stripers, in 2 feet of water. And
Yeah.
they're smashing the topwater plugs. And there was about a 2-3 week window last year where I was catching more bluefish on topwater than I was stripers. And then the bluefish went away, and the striped bass came back,
Yeah.
to the same general area. So I don't know if the blues forced the stripers out, and then when the blues left, the stripers moved back. But it seemed like it was really one or the other last year. And you also check holes too, because you'll see them swimming around. Do a slow cruise over a hole with your depth finder, see what's down there. If you see big arches, they could be bass, they could be blues.
Right.
But you just gotta, find the bait, find the fish, and hopefully it's the right one.
Well, you brought up something that we both wanted to talk about. You're talking about the electronics and using those. I had talked last week actually on a couple of recent podcasts and live streams about my difficulties with navionics and so on and so forth, and how I was actually when I was out fishing behind Atlantic City, and I'm looking on navionics, and I'm on land according to navionics,
Yeah.
and it's 16 feet of water. And you had made a comment to me about your issues with that. So let's dive into the electronics and the role that you think that they should be playing right now, because I'll just say right now, I wish I had something besides navionics right now, and I wish I hadn't spent the money for this year before I realized just how bad it's gotten over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Um,
So navionics, I use it. I don't buy chart cards because they're kind of pricey. You can get the same thing on your phone for I think it's like $40 or $50. I would
Yeah.
put it on a tablet or a phone. But yeah, I use navionics a lot. And when it comes to getting outside the channel, especially down the back bays like South Jersey, there's a lot of areas out there that show, according to navionics, are only 3 or 4 feet deep. But you go back there exploring, they're 15, 20 feet deep. And some of those spots that I found are like honey holes for flounder, stripers, and blues. And some of them all you can get back there at high tide. But once you
Yeah.
get back there, you got a hole that's 15, 20 feet deep, surrounded by shallow water, or maybe a creek or two feeding into it. You're going to catch fish, especially on outgoing
Right.
tide.
Right.
But
Yeah. I mean, they push in there. First thing, when the water's dropping, they're pushing into there, and they kind of hold there. If you could stay in there during the entire tide change, that you could produce throughout the entire thing. That can be difficult if you're in a boat, though.
yeah, I mean, I fish out a 24-foot center console. Some of the spots I go into, it's only about 2 feet deep at high tide. So you got a small window to get back in there, and you got to make sure you get out in time. Fishing by myself last year, I almost got myself into a major predicament. But
well, that's when it happens, when you don't have clients on board or somebody to help you out. That's when you get stuck.
yeah, we my last trip on Sunday, we were fishing one of those holes, and the drift is only about 30 yards by maybe 10 yards. You can drift the whole thing in about 30 seconds. We pulled 3 keepers out of that in about 5 minutes.
That's
Flounder,
awesome.
that is, not bass or
Yeah.
blues, but yeah, 3 flounder. But I mean, you run the
Those are
area
the
over
best.
so many times, and then the fish just shut down. But it's
Right.
good for a few drifts.
Yeah, there's really small spots. I mean, you can even there could be another 30 keepers in there, but once they keep getting pulled out, it's like striped bass. If you're fishing a dock at night, as an example, you catch a couple, they're going to go quiet for a little bit.
Yep.
So you almost have to wait through that. And when you're on a little micro spot that's a 30 by 10, I mean, you're just going to jog the whole time.
Yeah, especially when you got a boat parked right on top of them and the water is relatively clear.
Yeah.
They see you sitting up there, and I'm sure they hear you walking around in the boat, even though you're trying to be quiet.
Right.
But yeah, that's
yeah. Well, I'm not quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only thing that I don't like is music on the water. That's the only thing I don't like.
I listen to music. I'm one of those guys that listen to music, but I listen to it very quietly. Pretty much.
Well, that's the difference. Yeah.
So I can just barely hear it.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And I'll be casting for stripers at dusk, and I'll have music on, but like I said, I just have it barely on, to where you can barely hear it, but something in the background.
So I'm in a kayak, so I actually just put my earbuds in. Earbuds. Here's a little tip for people. So I almost always have at least one earbud in. If I have one earbud in and I'm on the water, that's because I'm listening to something. And I have the other one open because I want to hear a boat that's about to hit me and kill me. But the other reason is it's really good at keeping the no-see-ums out of your ears when they come out at first light or last light. So I'll throw them in there just to keep them from going inside my ears. But ran into that last week. I didn't have my earbuds with me, and I was on the water. And I hate using bug spray. I hate it.
Yeah, I use that stuff you get from like Tight Lines, that all natural stuff. Yep. It's pretty potent, in a good way, but it does a good job of keeping the no-see-ums off.
I'm gonna have to look into that. I'm done with the DEET and all that stuff. It's just no. I just don't want to use it anymore.
Yeah, it's like not Dr. Tom's. It's some guy's name, Captain Ron, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. I know which one.
That, but man, you spill that stuff on your gear. I have a compartment on my boat that still smells like that stuff when it broke last year. I think it's like it permanently embedded in the plastic.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, if it smells good, it's okay, but
it smells like citronella oil or something like that.
Oh, okay. So Ben's saying it's Captain Ron.
Oh, it's Captain Ron. Yeah,
I'll have to give that a shot. I'll give that a go. I don't like putting anything on, but especially like SPF, whatever. I don't put any of that on ever. I saw a study once. I don't know if you've ever seen studies on what suntan lotion does to you, but there was a test done on people that put it on, and what they did is they put a drop on somebody's toe. And they were testing the blood up in their like shoulder area. And within 2 seconds, it had carcinogens flowing through their blood all the way up there within like 2 seconds.
Oh, that's not
just
good.
One drop on their toe. I was like, that's the last thing I need is more bad stuff going through me. So
yeah, that's not good.
I'll just wear the long sleeve. All right, back to the fishing part. So, all right, so bluefish, and then fluke. Is fluke what you're getting most customers for at this point?
Yeah, I cater. I want to say cater. Most of my trips are fluke or flounder trips. I see some guys are giving me flack for using the word flounder, but I used to fish for them down in Florida and up in Mass, and they're called flounder. And, I guess it's just, the way I call them, flounder, fluke, same thing.
Well, they are summer flounder
Yeah,
that are nicknamed fluke, and
yeah,
people can argue about that all they want, but
yeah,
South Jersey, it's flounder.
yeah,
I go back and forth. I've given up the fight, so I typically say fluke now,
yeah,
but in my head, it's a summer flounder.
yeah. I feel like the words are just interchangeable, but
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mostly fish for flounder or fluke. Majority of my trips that I take clients on are all flounder trips. Fluke flounder. And sprinkle in some top water striped bass, either dawn or dusk, to finish it up or start it off, depending on if it's a morning or evening trip.
Yeah, so I did want to talk about the striped bass in a minute because that's actually the first time that I heard your name was all about topwater striped bass, and that you were a great person to go with if you want to hit those. So I want to talk about that in a minute. But while we're talking about the fluke, what's the setup that you use? Do you use the top and bottom with baits? Or are you doing the bucktail and teaser? What's your standard setup if you want to have a, let's say you're fishing a tournament? What are you putting on the
A
line?
spot, a spot off,
A spot. Oh
a
yeah.
spot off a dead stick. Well, I call it dead stick.
Uh-huh.
Some people call them knocker rigs. I just use an egg weight, a couple swivels, hold the egg weight in a certain spot, and about 4 or 5 feet of line and a hook or a floating jig head. I've
Yeah.
been actually
Okay.
using a lot of the floating jig heads that are made by a local vendor. I drop his name, but I forget who makes them. It's
Okay.
a local guy, but I buy his jigs over at Tight Lines, the floaters, and I like those more because if something goes wrong and your spot's dead, well, I guess spot shouldn't be dead. You'd be changing it out, but if you're using a minnow or something like that, it keeps off bottom,
Yeah.
out of the weeds and stuff like that. Or I'll usually use a hook with a minnow or a spot. If I'm not dead sticking, just a bucktail with a teaser.
Okay. Do you use gulp?
I do. I do on the bucktail. Have to use gulp, usually pink or nuclear chicken
Yeah.
are my two that I go to 90% of the time. I don't really, bucktails, pretty much all my bucktails are either chartreuse or white.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure why I picked those colors. It's just the two I picked and the two I've been going with for a while. And same with the floating jig heads. I got some oranges I think sprinkled in there, but whites and chartreuse and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'll go with whites. Typically, I do use pinks before chartreuse. Chartreuse is probably the third that I'll use,
Yeah.
and that's usually the third. I think because I buy the least, and if I lose them, then I don't use them as often.
Yeah.
So I tend to use whatever I had the most of. So, like right now, I think I only have like two whites left and like four pinks, or pink and white. So for the bucktail, so I'm kind of limited on those. And honestly, I don't see really any difference between them. But I do think that the pink gulps work.
They do. I
I
use
don't know
the,
why.
the little pink ones that kind of look like a minnow.
Yeah.
Are the best way to describe them. I run I
Yep.
think they're like 3 inches or 2.5s, the
Yeah.
smaller size ones. Those are the ones I default to, especially if I'm running clients. Because if you got little flounder down there, like little 12, 14 inchers, they're just fun for people to catch. I think you have a better chance of hooking one if you have a smaller gulp on there rather than a big 6 incher.
Yeah. And you will still catch those 24 or 25-inch fluke on that little gulp
Yep.
too. They don't care.
Yeah, we've caught some really nice fluke just off a minnow, off a dead stick.
Yeah.
When I'm fishing with like a novice or a kid, it's dead stick all the time because you don't have to jig it, and they just hold the pole, and you'd be surprised how many flounder you can catch just by holding the pole and letting it drag bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think we like to overthink things as fishermen. There's always this super secret technique that we have to share.
Yeah,
I think the number one technique in flounder fishing and most fishing is just get the bait in the water,
yep,
and let's start there. Now there are certain things, fly fishing. Yep, top water. Yep, you got to have some technique there. You have to know what you're doing. You can't just drag something across the top. Well, you still can catch fish, but you're not going to be as productive. But when it comes to bottom fishing, it's all about putting it in the right spot and just letting it sit sometimes.
yep,
And if you have a minnow on there and it's going to be moving anyway, there's not a lot. Your skill comes in with the hook set and understanding when you're getting that bite.
yep. That's all it is. If I'm running dead stick, I'll jig it a little bit just to make sure I'm maintaining good contact with the bottom. And, I'm
Yeah.
not dragging it or fall. If there's a depth change, I want to make sure I drop it down another couple feet. But kids just hold on to that fishing pole and just drag bottom, and it catches surprisingly a large amount of fish just by holding the fishing pole.
Yeah. I had we had a family friend when I was growing up. He used to go out fishing for bluefish with us, and we would go out offshore, out at like the 5 Fathom Bank back when that used to produce, and we'd be out there fishing bottom with bucktails. And this family friend, much older guy than me, he would sit in the back of the boat, he'd have a drink, and he would drop to the bottom, and he'd fall asleep. And man, did he catch fish.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything, but the second he had a bite, he would set the hook and he would wake up, and it would be mass chaos for a couple seconds while he got his bearings. But yeah, sometimes it's just getting it down there and going over the right spot. But yeah, I think people tend to overthink it. I had a guy try to tell me all this super secret techniques about I'm not going to say because I don't want people to start fighting, but one fish, and I'm thinking, just drop the bait. You're not doing anything but leaving the bait in one spot. Stop acting like this is some major, brain surgery thing here. It's literally drop your bait and wait.
Yep.
It was almost like bobber fishing. Just wait for it to go under and set the hook. So
that's actually something I want to try for flounder one of these days. When they're up in the shallow water, like the 3-4 foot depth range.
Yeah. Oh, that's
bobber and just let her go.
Yeah, you try the pop. Actually, use a popping cork with fluke or a flounder. The popping cork works really well for them. I've caught a bunch. I usually do it down in North Carolina when I'm fishing the sounds, but I've done it up here. I've done it in Cape May County sounds where you have less than 5 feet of water, and I put about 3 feet, so it's about 2 feet off the bottom, and I just used the popping cork. And I was getting fluke back in there.
Well, that's good to know, because I was going to experiment with the popping corks last year. I was actually going to do it for stripers. Put some bait on there, whether it be a spot or a minnow, and send that popping cork, along the sod banks and drag it like you would for like redfish or something like that.
It works perfectly for them.
You're actually the first person I've ever talked to that mentioned popping corks.
I carry at least one on the kayak with me at all times, and if I'm going for striped bass, I have on one of the 4 rods that I bring, I have a popping cork on there. So, I use it.
Yeah.
And it works really well. It works really well, especially when you get to the sod banks. Just as you said, actually, I fish it along the sod banks and along the points of sod banks at the edge of the sounds. So as you come down off of that shallow area and you get that drop, right where they kind of tuck themselves in and just face into that current on the outgoing. As it comes down there, you just pop that a few times and they nail it. It's just like, it's exactly like you would fish it for redfish.
Yeah, that's I went to the bait shop last year to buy some popping corks, so I didn't have any at the house, and they had no idea what they even were. So that threw out my popping cork idea for last year for the stripers, but we'll see. Maybe I'll give it a try this summer or spring.
Yeah, do it this summer. It works really well. Like I said, I always have one tied on. I think the first time I ever used it, it was probably, God, my kids were really young. So it was probably around 2005, 2006. And I was fishing on my boat solo at night. And I just tossed one out because I heard that they could be good. And here I am. It's total dark. And I'm thinking, I don't know where it is. So I'm hauling it towards the sod, and I want to make sure it's not on the sod. It's close to the sod. I can hear where it is. So I tried it, and I never stopped using it since then. It works really well.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, and you can put anything under it. You can just put a soft plastic. You can put actual natural baits. You can put, for multiple species, natural baits. You can put gulp works.
Yeah.
That's almost cheating when you're putting gulp on top of the popping cork. Because you get that noise, you get that disturbance. And I recommend trying it out. But try it for flounder too.
Good to know.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about your top water striped bass, because that's what I've heard you're known for.
Yeah, so that's what I do. If I'm fishing by myself with friends, there's going to be some top water involved in every fishing trip, unless it's like August or something like that. But this time of year, as I live right down the road from the ramp, I can put the boat in the water and go fish, prime time, right at dusk. But I did bring some examples, which I'm sure a lot of your viewers probably have seen this stuff. But
we'll show it anyway.
Go-to lure, 5-inch Zara Spook. 5-inch has been working great lately. Last year, same model, different size, 3.5 incher. They would only eat the 3.5 incher last year. This year, they don't want to touch it. Don't know why.
Really?
No idea. And it was Zuri's version. I don't know what this one's called, but it's Zuri's version of the Zara Spook.
Yeah.
Works equally as good. But I will say, using the 5-incher, 15-pound test with a lighter action rod, you can send that thing a football field.
Yeah.
And it makes fishing topwater, creek mouths, and the back so much easier. Because
So when you're doing that, actually, so I had this question asked to me last week through Messenger. Now, I wasn't exactly sure how to answer it because there's so many options. So for top water, talk about the rod that you're using when you're slinging that 5, anything from 3.5 to a 5-inch spook. What type of rod are you using? What action are you using? Is there something that you think works better?
I actually scaled down my gear a little bit this year. I used to use I think they're 4,000 series reels, a
Yeah.
7-foot medium heavy action rod. This year I scaled down to 2,500s with
Yeah.
15-pound test and a 7-foot medium action rod, which is pretty light. And it's something that you'd probably be using for like smallmouth bass. You
Yep.
can't use it out front because, you're not getting in a 40-pound striper off that thing. But for the back bay, the schoolies, the 15 to 25 inchers, that lighter action rod works great because you can zing the smaller Zara spooks that are relatively light because that rod's got some whip to it, and you can send those smaller lures, a decent ways also. But
Now, are you using fast action? Or are you
yeah,
using
they're all
moderate
fast.
fast?
Yeah, they're
all fast.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, in your opinion, if you're fishing top water, do you want it faster rather than slower, or do you
Are you talking about the
like if you
action
had
or
to go
the bringing in the lure?
when you're bringing in the lure, ignore the fish? Like
Yeah.
for the action, do you prefer like if you couldn't get fast, would you then go to extra fast, or would you go down to moderate fast?
Probably moderate fast. I haven't even used an extra fast.
Okay.
They're all fast, or I believe like the next one down is like a moderate or medium, like you said.
Yeah.
But if I were to look at all my rods, they're probably all fast action.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's another one of those things where, well, it does matter with top water because you need to be able to work the action of that lure.
Yeah, that's a good point too, which I didn't mention is the action of the rod makes a big difference. When you're bringing the lure in and getting the proper action out of the spook.
Yeah. So what's your default action on that spook? Are you walking? What are you doing?
Yeah, I just walking the dog.
Okay.
I would say, it's hard to describe what speed I go, but I don't know, not too slow, not too fast. You gotta find that sweet spot. Sometimes bringing in a little bit faster seems to trigger bites, but usually I just like to do, I call it normal speed. My definition of a normal speed might be different than someone else's, but it's kind of hard to describe without, showing someone how fast to bring it in, I should say. But
yeah, I do all these stupid things. Like when I'm reeling in and I'm doing top water, I'm like counting in my head and trying to keep a certain pace. And I'm like,
yeah, I don't think that far into it with counting in my head or keeping a certain pace.
I overthink it.
Yeah, you don't have to overthink it. Sometimes I do like to twitch, pause, on the spook. Sometimes that works. If I'm not getting a hit, I'll try to twitch, pause and keep it in that sweet spot a little bit longer. But usually just like a steady action, just, bring it in. I always tell people if they're struggling with getting the action, you're using the rod and the rod's action to make the lure work and come in your direction, and you're just cranking in the slack line with your handle. Right. A lot of times I find people trying to crank the handle and move the rod at the same time, which creates improper action and just makes it harder than it needs to be. Just keep pushing the rod and just reel in the slack.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I see a lot of people doing it. They're reeling as they're jigging.
Yeah.
And they're wondering why it's not walking.
Yeah. And then another point, if you do use a 15-pound test, I always tell people stop the lure before it hits the water. Put your finger on the line, stop the lure, stops the wind knots. Yeah. Because if you let that lure hit the water, your line's still paying out of the reel, and that's how you get your wind knots. And unfortunately, I see it way too often, but it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, and as a captain, you have to deal with 100% of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that would drive me nuts. I mean, it drives me nuts if I get one. I get really angry with myself because 99% of the time it's your own fault.
Yep.
Um, but every once in a while you get a freshly spooled reel and your first cast doesn't. You're like, all right, maybe this is over spooled,
Yep.
which is typically what happens because the bait shops, they want to, if you get somebody else spool it for you, they want to give you as much line as possible so you're happy, but it doesn't help because once it's over spooled, now you're getting you're getting wind knots.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to put too much line there. I actually switched to some Chinese braid off Amazon.
Did you
I experimented with this spring, and I've had actually great results so far.
really? Do
So
you know which brand it is?
I unfortunately I don't. If you go on Amazon, it's I think it's Reaction Tackle. It comes in like white. I'm pretty sure it's Reaction. Made by
Okay,
Reaction. It comes on a white spool. I was actually pleasantly surprised how well it worked.
I'll give it a go.
We'll see. We'll see
I
long term durability. How well it
I
is.
have
But
braid that's like 4 years old, so I need to replace on some. It used to be blue and now it's like white almost.
yeah, I mean, if you got a new reel or got a different reel you want to use, just put it on backwards.
Yeah,
Just move that line from one reel to the next. Then you got fresh stuff now on the top.
yeah. I think I'm out of. I think they've all been flipped twice.
No, yeah.
Um,
You're out of flips at that point.
yeah, it's about time that I just. I mean, it's not that expensive. I should just do it, I guess. But I'll check that out. I want to try different brands because everyone says here's my favorite. I think I've only had one that I didn't like ever, and I've tried multiple different brands, and that was I think it was Spider Wire. I didn't like, but every other one has been fine. Like
Yeah.
I just don't see the big difference.
I
I
tried
don't see the big difference.
I tried spider wire probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and all it
Yeah,
did was destroy my fishing pole. It's so
yeah.
long ago, I don't remember how it did it, but it burned a hole or not like a groove in the reel.
In the real,
Yeah, it like the line kept getting. I mean, granted, I was like probably like 15 at the time,
yeah.
so I didn't really probably know any better. But where the bell connects to like the roller area, it actually burned a groove in there, and then it did the
Uh,
same to the eye, like the front eye on the fishing pole. So
yeah,
I never used.
back then they didn't make the guides weren't able to stand up to the heat of the braid, so they would get notches in them.
Yeah, that's what happened, and that was the first and last time I used spider wire.
I think that was actually more the problem with the rod than the braid.
Oh
But
yeah, definitely. But
yeah, but I get it. I mean, once that happens, you're like, I'm not using that anymore.
yeah,
We're getting some recommendations in the chat. Cortland braid, which is definitely I've used that. Cast King, had good reviews on that I've never used that though. But Ben is asking about what you're using to tie your leader connection when you're going top water. What's the knot that you're using, or what's the setup?
so the knot that I'm using, and I don't know, back in the day before YouTube, and little 12-year-old me trying to figure out how to tie my braid to my mono.
Yeah,
I didn't really have resources. So looking at like Field and Streams and then Fisherman, I was looking at knots.
do a nail knot.
Yeah, and
Yep.
I have my own version of a knot, which is probably a hodgepodge of 2 or 3 different knots that I have no name for because I made it myself.
Yeah.
It's like a version of the FG knot, I believe. I'm not really good at my knot names. I just know how to tie them, but
Yeah.
it's like a version of the FG knot. And
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. I learned how to tie that knot. I figured it out, forever ago, and I just been rolling with it for the past 20 years, however long it's been.
That's a great knot to use then.
But yeah, that's what I mean. I've tried a couple times. I kicked the tires on trying to change it to tie different ones, but I always default to what I've been doing because I can tie it so fast.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. I mean, it hasn't failed. I mean, I'm sure it's failed a few times. Naturally, it will eventually. But yeah, I kind of made my own. I should probably.
That's awesome.
Uh,
That's awesome. Dude, you got to name it. I mean, you can be like Alberto.
that's what I mean. I got to put a patent on it because
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know a way to explain it better than that. But I wasn't very good at tying knots in my younger days, and looking at pictures and no YouTube videos made it very difficult. And I made one that worked.
Yeah. I was talking to my wife the other day, and she was like, "Oh, you know how to do these knots. Help me with this." I was like, "Look, I know how to make like 4 knots off the top of my head. I'm like, I can do an FG knot. That's what I use.
Yep.
I can snell a hook. All right. So
Yeah, that's an
that,
easy one.
yeah, if that counts, I can do the old standard fisherman's knot.
Yep.
I can do a dropper loop, and I can do like one other.
Yep.
I can't even do a uni to uni. I don't remember how to do it because I never do. It's like the easiest knot. It's done in like 13 seconds from, the time that you decide that you're going to do it to when you're done and your line's on the bottom again. But I don't know how to do it because I just never do. I just use the FG.
Yeah, that's what I use. And I use like the fisherman's knot, for my lures. Yep. Or I'll use what I call a Rapala knot, which is the one that has like the loop in it.
Yep.
And then the snell.
That's the one that I use. Yeah. And I learned it from back in the day when I was a kid. That's what came in the lure.
Yeah, that was
they had the little
picture on
the
pamphlet.
Lure. Yeah.
But
it works. It works awesome. I mean, I've used it for shark. I've used it for mahi. I use it for fluke. I use it for everything.
Yeah.
Because it's just easy. It's quick and easy, and you really can't mess that up. Like you can mess up an FG knot. Like an FG knot, you can get done tying it. You can look at it, and it's beautiful. And as soon as you pull the two lines, it'll just fall apart.
Yep.
If you went one wrap went the wrong way, you're done.
Yep. And that's probably like I said, it was a long time ago where I figured out how to tie that knot, and that was the problem I was most likely having. So
all right,
I got my.
So it's going to be the JP knot.
That's
the JP knot is what you're using.
I'll submit my patent tomorrow.
There you go. And then you can come on here and publicize it. You're gonna have to write a book. You're gonna have to start a YouTube channel. You're gonna have to get famous from it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I had him out for Top Water Stripers a couple of months ago, and I'm not sure if I showed him how to tie it or not. But a lot of times, that's actually a very common question I get on a lot of my trips because a lot of people don't know how to tie their braid to their mono or their fluorocarbon. So I wind up showing a lot of people how to do it.
Yeah, and that in my opinion is like the most important knot that you can know. Because the alternative is you tie your braid to some metal.
Yep.
You don't want metal.
No.
The less connections you have, the better. The less metal and plastic out there, the better. So I'm like, look, just learn the uni to uni, learn the FG, learn something that's going to work. You learn the nail knot if that's what you need to do.
Yep.
But just something so that you don't have all that crap in the water, especially if you're bottom fishing, because then it's picking up the current. Yep. Now you have to use heavier weight to get down to the bottom because it's just going to keep lifting.
Yeah, those little swivels, people don't realize, if you use a swivel, even a smaller one, how much drag they have.
Yeah.
And if you were to cast a topwater lure like a smaller one and you have a barrel swivel on there, you'll usually be able to see that line sinking down because that swivel is going to be dragging down the line wherever you have it, connected to your stuff. And then you run into problems reeling the swivel up in the eye of your fishing pole every time, and you don't want to do that.
And I reel all the way on. I will actually start off. So I'm lazy, right? So at the start of the season, I will tie a 6-foot leader onto my let's say a fluke rod. I'll go 6 feet and I'll tie everything up and I'll have it all set up and I'll just wind it right on.
Yeah.
And I'll just keep going. And then as I have to cut it, I'll cut it and cut it and cut it. So I can go like 2 months.
Yep.
And I never have to replace the thing. And then it starts getting a little short. Then I'll just cut it off at the braid and tie a new FG knot. But you can't do that with a swivel.
No.
And you're going to pick up every little bit of seaweed. And the worst is when the snotweed is in the water.
Oh, got it.
Getting that off a swivel.
Yeah, that's I can't wait till that shows up.
Yeah, well, I was in it last week if you can believe it. I thought it was a little early, but I was like, this sucks.
Yeah, it should be any day now. But yeah, that 6-foot leader too. That's why I do the same thing. I start with like a 6-foot leader because you don't want to start with like a 3 or 4. Especially if you're swapping lures out, you don't want to be tying on a new leader at prime time because your 3 or 4 foot leader is now a 1-foot leader.
Right.
So yeah, definitely always want to start with a 6 or around there.
So are you
5, 6?
So are you using fluoro or are you using mono? If it's, again, I'm not asking for when you're with clients because it may be a different answer, but are you using mono or fluoro for yourself when you're on the water?
So I actually use fluorocarbon coated leader.
Okay.
It's all my leaders made by P-Line. I don't know if you see, I'm sure you've seen the brand before, P-Line. It's called fluorocarbon coated leader, which I honestly don't know the difference. I don't put that much thought into it. Salt Strong actually did a lot of testing on fluorocarbon versus mono,
Yep.
and they come to the conclusion that fluorocarbon is a waste of money. I don't buy fluorocarbon, straight fluorocarbon leader. If I'm like when I was down in Key West, I was down there for a little while. When I say a little while, a month, I use fluorocarbon because the water is like gin clear.
Exactly.
But up here, I don't buy the cheap stuff. P line's a good middle ground. And
Yeah.
fluorocarbon
Okay.
coated all the way around.
All right. I use mono.
Yeah,
I know that the Salt Strong stuff, when I worked there, we went into detail on it, and it was like, yeah, there's no strength difference with the fluoro and the abrasion testing. You're definitely better off with the mono.
yep,
But to your point, we fish an entirely different fishery because our clear water days are like their dirtiest water days down in Florida,
yep,
and I do believe that fluoro is probably a lot harder to see in the water than mono. But up here, I mean, I put cameras down underwater, and you'd think it's like going through like it's like tea
yeah,
on the clearest days. Like you can see like 6 feet. And you're like, oh, it's so clear. And I put a camera down, like I can see like 6 feet, but it's just dirt.
yeah,
That's all it is.
yeah. We tried that last year on one of the bridges, dropping a camera down, and
Yeah.
same thing. You got the bridge piling like 2 feet in front of the camera. You
Uh
can
huh.
barely see the bridge piling.
Yeah. That's like a lot of people say, yeah, the fish weren't biting today. I'm like, I've very slowly gone to they weren't biting to you have to, like, if you find a good spot, you really have to pound it for some of these tides because they're not going to see it if it comes by them 2 feet away.
Yeah,
And if it's 30 feet of water, the chances that if you're just dropping it and you're vertical jigging as you drift, chances of them seeing that are not good. And you got to be extremely precise, and you have to know exactly where that bucktail is going when it's underneath you to make sure you hit that spot. So it's like you have to work every spot really hard, or go shallower, or start fan casting is probably your best bet, because then if you can spot lock it and fan cast, because now you know exactly what water you're covering, and you can literally hit all of it.
yep.
Yeah, the water's terrible.
I
It's
can't go on the
terrible
fan
condition.
cast, and if I'm drifting for flounder, I make sure I'm not doing the same drift twice. I'll zoom in on my track lines, and I got certain areas I want to hit, but I'll make sure I'm 10 feet to the right or 10 feet to the left of my previous drift, unless I picked up some fish, and I'll run the same track line again. But I try my best to run different track lines, to ensure you're not hitting the same spot twice.
Man, I always try to get maybe well, I'm sure your electronics are a lot better than mine. Yours aren't sitting, 6 inches off the water in a kayak that it's going to tip over.
Yeah,
I I I hit it hard. Like if I'm really fishing, like let's say I'm fishing a tournament, I will literally try to fish the same 5 foot hole 6 or 7 drifts.
yeah,
Just thinking I'll hit it different every time. If I'm just out there on the water, like last week, I don't think I redrifted anything all day. I just drifted once over. Maybe that's why I only got 2 fish.
yeah. If I'm fishing by myself or fishing in a tournament, and I have certain areas where I wouldn't say there will be a bigger fish down there, but I feel like I have a good chance of pulling a big one out of there because we've done it before. I'll do what you did, where I'll hit that hole numerous times
Yeah.
and make smaller adjustments, and make sure I hit, every inch of that hole before I move on to something else. But, if you're
So
fishing with clients,
your normal is drifted, then move over 10 feet, drifted. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that's a good way to cover it. And you cover more territory that way.
yeah, because especially if you're fishing with clients and you don't want to sit in the same spot and do the same drift over and over again and not catch anything. You might be moving a little bit, but they don't see it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those smaller holes, like you talked about it during I think it was like one of your flounder or fluke, things that you talked about a couple weeks ago, hitting those
Hmm.
small spots that you pointed out on Navionics,
Yeah.
where you got like, I think you called like wasteland, nearby,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you got
Yep.
those really nice ledges. Like you're definitely spot on. Like those are the ledges that you have to hit, and that's where your small 2 foot increments are going to come into play, because that ledge that you're trying to hit in that big area is really, really small.
Right.
And then in that case, my 10 foot left, 10 foot right isn't going to work because, I'm going to be in 2 feet of water, or I'm going to be in 30 feet of water with nothingness around.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I mean, the ledges do work. Those little spots work.
They do.
Last week I was out with Joe Billups, and we were fishing the edge of a channel, and it went from 5 feet down to, I think, around 12. And we were literally fishing that ledge. Every fish that we caught that day was caught on a ledge, and I didn't see one other keeper caught from any of the boats fishing, but they were all drifting the middle. Every single one of them was just drifting right down the middle.
Yeah, I think I know which spot you're talking about. If
Yeah.
I'm not getting your videos confused with one another, you pointed out. Someone asked about. It's actually Corson's, down Corson's. I don't know. Is that the
No,
spot you're talking about?
no, it's a different one, but yeah,
Yeah,
Corson's is a good example.
yeah. One of your viewers asked about Corson's, and you were pointing out some spots on a Corson's. And I'm like, oh man, he's like right on my spot. Like
Yeah.
you missed it by a little bit, but you point out a really good spot down there. That's
Yeah.
similar to that, where you got all the people in the ICW, the boats drifting down the middle of the channel, but the good spot is right on the edge,
Yeah.
and no one hits it.
Right.
Except kayakers. I see a lot of kayakers there all the time, but the boats all just blow right by it.
Yeah. And you look, in defense of the boaters, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to move a boat and get it on that little edge there. If you look at a kayaker, we're pedaling forward and backwards constantly in order to maintain that ledge. And once we drop, on that one, it dropped from 5 to 12 feet. As soon as it got down to like 8 feet, I'm going forward again to try to get back up and stay on it. So I didn't get down into the 12 foot.
Yep.
I'm fishing the back side of that top ledge. And you can't do that with a boat. It takes a lot more to move that thing. So
Yeah,
it
it does. It's a lot of work, especially if you're trying to operate a fishing pole and a remote at the same time.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, those ledges you talk about, you can't overemphasize how important it is to be on that ledge. Because if you're not on it, you're not going to catch anything.
no. Or you're going to you'll catch the smaller ones,
Yeah.
but the bigger fish are definitely going to be in the better spots. Yeah. So we're into this for almost 50 minutes, but I wanted to talk to you about sheep's head.
Yep.
So
Sheephead.
you've been successful in sheep's head. Now, my first question is, you got a big boat for sheep's head fishing bridges. Are you pulling that right up on the bridges, or do you have a second rig that you use?
No, I use that boat. I get battle scars every year.
Okay.
So some of the pilings are more forgiving than other ones, but you got to be careful. And usually what I do is I'll maintain the front of the boat with the trolling motor, and I'll hold the stern away from the pilings.
You gotcha.
Because a lot of those pilings have bolts sticking out.
Yep.
And you got to pay attention because you can get away with it maybe high tide or low tide, but at certain tides, those bolts are in prime location to get you. But some pilings you can nose up to where you're just bow into it. But, that bridge that we were talking about before this, I get all up in those pilings. And
Do you?
yeah, I get in there. I get in there in between, that concrete, those square concrete, things, and those little ones that I call icebreakers.
Yeah.
So I'll get right up in there.
That's where we go with kayaks to try to escape the boats.
Oh, I'll get in there. I'll make it fit.
I've had, so all the credit in the world to you. I've seen a couple of guys do that.
Yeah.
I was fishing one of them. It was a bridge up near AC. Maybe it was Brigantine. I think it was the Brigantine Bridge, and a boat just came right in. There's two of us in kayaks, and he's like, "Hey guys," and he pulls right in. We're like, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, there's plenty of room." I'm like, "Well, not for us. We can't get out now."
Blocked
He's
in.
like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Let me know when you want to leave." I'm like, "Okay, man." But yeah, he got in there, and he didn't have a 24-foot boat though.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hybrid hull. It's a Carolina Skiff Ultra Elite.
Yep.
So it's not like it's a deep V, offshore 24-foot. I mean, if that's the correct term to use for a 24-footer. So it's, I guess, a smaller 24.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit easier to maneuver. It's lighter. The wind doesn't take it as bad. So you can get up in there, but it's hard, and you got to be careful, or else you'll have some good scarring.
Yeah, and you can't spot lock it either.
Nope, you cannot. That's one thing a lot of people don't realize is the bridge will mess with the GPS. And you'll accelerate when you don't want to accelerate, and you're going to be smashing into something that's hard and not forgiving.
Yeah, and that's the worst sound is a crunch when you're on a fiberglass boat.
Yep.
It's just instant, like you feel the tears welling up.
Yeah, and it doesn't really give you any time to react either because it happens so fast.
Yeah.
If I'm within 50 yards of a bridge, whether I'm under it or next to it, I don't spot lock anymore. I'll just
Yeah.
manually hit the remote just because I'm not messing around. But
Yeah, it gets. I get nervous when I'm sheep's head fishing or tog fishing in those bridges, and I'm in a kayak, and I do believe being in a kayak, I'm in a much safer position than the boats
yep,
as far as damage and everything. Yeah, I could get tossed a lot easier, but I'm not going to get damaged as quickly as a boat. And I say that having look, my boat before it was sold had tons of battle scars and a lot of crunches from sod banks and submerged pilings
yep,
and the bolts. The scariest thing to me is the bolts that
yep.
stick out from these pilings on the bridges.
Yeah, knock on wood, I haven't had a run in with a bolt yet. But I do have some other various scratches and stuff like that. But um, the kayak thing. You mentioned kayaks around bridges.
Yeah,
To kind of tie into that conversation I had before, it's about me catching that fishing pole. That's how the fishing pole wound up in the water. Was he got waked out by a boat that didn't know he was there? Kayak got wedged under one of those bolts and pretty much got swamped and flipped over.
yeah.
So for the kayakers that are around bridges, you still got to watch those bolts because um, someone lost all his stuff last year because of one of those bolts.
It's never a good situation, and people don't slow down for bridges when they don't think there's anyone there,
No, and
when they
that's
don't see
it.
the kayaks.
They don't, and sometimes they don't even they don't see you, especially on a kayak.
Yeah,
And then I
well,
feel like,
especially if you're behind an icebreaker.
yep,
There's the one bridge up near Ventnor. I don't know that I've ever seen anyone go through there without a wake.
yep,
They fly through there.
yeah, they do, and I feel like half the people on the weekends do it just because they think it's funny to wake you out as you're getting smashed in the piling. But
Uh-huh.
yeah,
That's probably true.
yeah.
Probably true. So let's talk about sheepshead a little bit. What are you doing as far as baits and technique for that? So you're pulling up on the bridge. You've told us how you're holding the position. What's your technique?
Yeah, so I'll use the bomb sweeper. I actually use a different brand, Hearst Tackle. I use
Mm-hmm.
his bomb sweepers.
Yep.
I like them. They're a little bit easier on the wallet. And then just fiddler crabs or Asian crabs. So it depends what I can find. I really don't get wrapped up in the weeds in regards to a fiddler or an Asian.
Yeah.
I don't use sand fleas. I never had much luck with them, and don't use green crabs for sheephead. I don't know if really anyone does, but fiddlers and Asians the whole way.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
pull up to a piling. I got live scope, so it's kind of cheating in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll pull up to
That's
a
okay.
piling. I'll put the thing down. We'll fish it for 5-10 minutes. If we don't pull up a sheephead and I don't see any swimming around down there, it's on the next piling.
Okay.
And a lot of times we'll hit a piling, and I don't know if you've had similar results. We'll hit a piling. We might pull one or two sheephead off it, and they just stop biting.
Yeah.
You'll see them. You'll see them down there, like they're there. But after I catch one or two, I feel like they just stop. Move to a next piling. And I'll circle back.
Yep.
In a couple hours or something, and you very well could pull another sheephead off that last piling.
I actually typically get one off a piling and that's it.
Yeah.
And
So
then I
you're
move
not
to
too
the
far
next
off
one.
what usually happens to us.
Yeah. The one bridge that we were talking about before we came on the air, that video, I caught one fish per piling.
Yep.
And they were all around double digit, but there was no second fish on any of those pilings at all.
Yeah, I think they just get wise. Like watch them on live scope. They don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
You catch your one fish or two fish. For a couple minutes they might be gone, but just wait, they'll come back.
Yeah.
They might not bite, but they'll come back.
Yeah, it's too much work for me.
It is.
It's too much. I get stressed when I'm trying to hold. Well, I saw this question in the chat, but what are you thinking as far as current? Like what time of the tide are you doing? Are you doing with the highest flow, the lowest, slack tide?
So I don't. I usually try and fish when there's current. My theory on it is the current's going to keep them by the piling.
Yeah.
And the faster the current's flowing, the harder it is for those fish to stay in that moving current. So they're naturally going to move into those eddies behind the pilings. And, I've had greater results when the current's cranking but it's also considerably harder to maintain position when the current's cranking
Right.
because you got a boat and one little miscue with the trolling motor, you're 50 yards downstream.
Yeah.
Before you can recover.
Yep.
Because some of those bridges, man, their current gets going, a mile and a half, 2 miles an hour sometimes, and you get out of that little eddy, the trolling motor's not going to hold you anymore. At least mine doesn't.
Right. Yeah, and a kayak, I mean, it's just so hard. You're constantly pedaling and maneuvering, and it's, the eddy wants to kick you left, then wants to kick you right,
Yeah.
and then if it does grab the front, then you better have good balance because it'll literally tip you over
Oh yeah, that
because
wouldn't
you're
be good.
swinging so fast. I've seen that happen. That's probably how that guy dumped at that bridge and lost that rod.
Yeah. Well, he told me he got waked out by a boat.
Oh,
Boat
wake
didn't
that.
know he
Wow.
was there. Wake came through, and his kayak got wedged under the bolt when the wake came through. So the kayak couldn't go up with the waves,
Ugh.
and that was all she wrote. But for the no current situations, I like to chum using the mussels and stuff that are on the pilings.
Okay.
I'll bring a shovel with me,
You'll
flathead
scrape.
shovel, and I'll scrape when there's no current.
Okay.
You do it when there's current. Whatever you scrape off is going to wind up downstream.
Yep.
It's like you're just wasting, the mussels that are on the piling. But I like to chum with the mussels. Using my shovel when there's no current, and I think it attracts them. Might just be witchcraft or something like that. But
Yeah.
I like to do it because I think it works.
Right.
But I don't have any scientific proof to back up my claim.
Okay. Well, we don't need science. We just need to know what works for people that catch fish, right?
Yep.
And we'll figure it out on our own, see if it works for us. I think that there's a lot to be said about what works and doesn't work. And we've talked about it on here before that if you think that if your favorite lure, this was an example we used. I used to fish with Ed a lot, who used to be a co-host on here, and he insisted that this one the dart spin was the worst lure ever. He couldn't catch a thing on it. It sucked. So whenever he'd tie it on, he would never catch anything. And I would sit next to him with a dart spin. I would catch, and he'd be looking at me. He's throwing the same exact thing, and I think it was because he didn't believe it was going to work, so it didn't.
Yeah.
He was working it differently, and I think there's a big part of that in fishing. That if you believe something's not going to work, it's probably not going to work for you, and it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that could happen. So
Yeah, those
I
dark
think there's a lot of that.
those dark spins that you're talking about, those are good lures. I've
Yeah,
dabbled in them a little bit. They're not my go-to, but I've used them, and definitely they definitely work.
I like them. I like them for striped bass primarily,
Yep,
but they're a little expensive
they are.
because once you get the blues through there, it's one chomp and you lose the spin.
Yeah, and that's
you
the
know,
thing too. With the bluefish, I'm running 15-pound test, 20-pound test because unless I'm targeting them, if I'm targeting them, I'll up it to like 30 or 40. But
yeah,
I stay away from wire leaders.
yeah,
In case there's stripers around. In my opinion, a striper isn't going to smash a lure that has a wire leader hanging from it. So
agreed.
I try and stay away from wire leaders and just send that thing out there without a wire leader and hope for the best.
Yeah, I won't use a wire leader anymore.
No.
It's just, again, I like to wind things on. I don't like to use anything that can't be wound on, and a wire leader is not getting wound in.
Yep.
And I have to use a swivel then and all that stuff. But the only time that I think that I would use wire is for shark.
Yeah, I do too. I'll be back in like 30 seconds. I gotta let my dog out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Be back.
Go ahead. In the meantime, guys, if you have any other questions as we get up here at the hour, actually, right now we just hit 1 hour. So we're going to wrap this up real quick, but get any other questions that you may have in the chat. I'll look through there real quick and see if I can find any that we missed. But I think we've done a good job keeping up with the questions.
But do you ever try corn for sheephead?
I haven't.
I was gonna try that this summer. I've been seeing a lot of YouTube videos of people using corn.
Really?
It's on my list of things to experiment with.
Are those videos from guys down south?
Yeah, they're down south. I think
Yes.
they might have been like Virginia guys. I don't remember. They're not from around here. But
I would definitely try it then. I mean, they've been catching sheep's head for a lot longer and
yep,
consistently than we have, so it's worth a try, right?
yep,
The one thing that I heard with So you can't use corn for certain fish because they can't digest it. So you're actually not
Right.
allowed to use it in freshwater in certain places. I wonder if that's the same for, I mean, it's not the same. Like you can use it. It's not outlawed or anything for saltwater that I know of, but
I don't know. I
I
never
wonder if
really
the,
looked into the legalities of it. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I didn't really think about that. But
No, I think it's legal. I mean, like participation trophy fishing is saying they use it for winter flounder. I've used it for winter flounder. I've never used it for sheep's head though.
yeah,
But I wonder if they can digest it or if there's that issue. But the difference between a brook trout in size and hardiness and a sheep's head is going to be significantly different too.
yes, that is true.
Yeah. No, I've never tried it. I did talk the other one of these recent shows, I think with Halkias about using raw chicken, and
Yep.
that works well for fluke, not winter flounder, but for summer flounder, it definitely works well if you just remember that you're touching raw chicken and you don't, put your hands in your mouth afterwards.
Yeah, the one guy, Steven, mentioned using shrimp for sheephead. When I was living in Florida, that's what we'd use. Just shrimp, just live shrimp. Drop them down on a knocker rig, and down there they're on bottom, not 3 feet from the top like they are here. But
Yeah.
they love shrimp. At least down
Do you know
south.
of any places where we can get live shrimp in New Jersey?
I don't know. Um, I really don't know, to be honest with you, on that one. I couldn't answer that one.
That would be awesome. I would love if there were a place. I've never run into one though. And to me, it's a big difference between a live shrimp and dead shrimp.
Yeah, absolutely. Down south, it was the difference between catching something and not catching something. If your shrimp was alive or your shrimp was dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Up here, I mean, I do have a lot of success with shrimp. Um, but here's the thing, like shrimp is like the victim of every species in the water. Like
Yep.
it's literally at the bottom of the food chain. So the problem I have with shrimp is you go out and you buy all the shrimp and you drop it down for whatever. You can drop it for tog. You can drop it. I mean, it's good fluke bait too. You can drop it down there, but you're going to pick up the dogfish. You're going to pick up the cocktail blues. You're going to pick up sea bass, the sea robins, the puffer fish. Literally everything in the water is going to go after it. And most of it is going to be the trash fish. It's going to be the skates and it's going to be the dogfish and
Yep.
it's going to be the sea bass.
Ugh.
I can't stand those.
The micro sea bass are the bane of my existence. Come like July
Yeah,
and August.
yeah, me too. I can't stand them. I
So
just
many gulp are lost to those things.
yeah, yeah. All right, we got time for one more question from Tim Nicholson. I'll put it on screen here. Are you catching your fiddler crabs? Are you going out and catching them yourself, or are you paying a local kid
Nope.
to go catch them?
I catch them myself. I know I haven't personally tried the bucket trick. You dig a hole, put a bucket in, and put some, chicken in the bucket, and they fall in the bucket. I would like to try it this summer because it's a lot less work. But what I do is I go out low tide. I got some bridges by me. I just flip rocks, and it's got spots where you flip rocks for 10 minutes, and you got more fiddlers or I'm sorry, Asians. They know what to do with.
Yeah,
Fiddler crabs, on the other hand, I'm going to the beach by like grass, by rocks, find the hole, take my shovel, stick it next to the hole, then flip the sand up, and now comes the fiddler.
yeah,
But I just say it's comment clear it said fiddler, but my mind went to Asian crabs
yeah.
for some reason. But yeah,
Well, they're
fiddlers
easier.
yeah. But yeah, fiddlers, just find the hole, put your shovel next to the hole, and flip that shovel up, and now comes your fiddler.
Yeah, I want to try that bucket trick sometime. The problem that I've seen as far as whether it works or not is it works, but then the seagulls will realize it's there and they will just pick them out.
Yeah.
So they'll sit next to it.
Well, another one I wanted to try too this summer was chicken, pretty much chicken on a string. I
Yeah.
tried it last year. I didn't have any success, but taking like a chicken leg and putting it where like Asians frequent. And in theory, when you pull up your chicken in a couple hours or 3 hours, you're going to have a bunch of crabs attached to it. It did not work for me last year, but I want to try it again because it just, it does take too much time to find, 30 or 40 Asians and fiddlers.
Yeah.
But I'd rather be doing other things with my time than flipping rocks or digging holes.
I can't stand when I have to get my own crabs off of the shoreline. I'll do the Asian shore crabs because they are quick and easy. I feel like a fool when I'm chasing fiddlers around.
Yeah.
I just feel so stupid.
Yeah, you got to have a good spot. I got a spot by me, and I don't want to spot burn it because I'm the only one that goes there. But
Yeah, don't burn.
it's conveniently located down the road from my house, so I can go there the evening before and catch all my fiddlers.
Yeah.
While people eat dinner and wonder what I'm doing. But
So I'll tell you that the one spot that I found, I'll give it up because it's nowhere near us. It's down near Rodanthe in North Carolina, and it's right after Oregon Inlet. There's a little public launch for kayaks on the west side of the road, right after Oregon Inlet. And dude, so the tide only moves like 6 inches.
yeah,
Right? High and low tide, it's like 6 inch difference, but it means the world to these little fiddler crabs. And there will literally be thousands of them walking across the parking lot and like under the cars and trucks and everything from one side to the other as the tide changes. So all you have to do is just grab a bucket and just scoop with your hands, and you get an entire bucket of them.
so easy.
Oh my God. You're launching your kayak, and all you do is you just grab a bucket and turn around and just scoop, and you're done. You have all your bait for the day.
I've had that happen a couple times around here where I pull up to my spot and I don't know, the sun's just right or whatever, but they're all out on the beach just hanging out. You walk up and you're just trying to grab them as fast as you can before they go into the holes. But a lot of times you're just flipping holes over. But
yeah, well, I try to avoid that. That's why I'll go with Asian shore crabs before anything. I'll even use green crabs for sheepshead, and I have caught some on there, but it's only because I was too lazy to get the proper bait, I think.
Yeah. I just, like I said, I haven't, I tried sand fleas a little bit, but I feel like they fall off before I catch anything with them.
Yeah, they do. They fall off way too easy. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on. It's great to meet you, and great to have this conversation. I'm gonna have to take a look out for you when I'm on the water with you and near some of these bridges that we've talked about.
Yeah, I feel like we frequent the same area, so it's only a matter of time before we bump into.
Yeah, I'm sure we've passed each other at least a few times out on the water. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm not really sure what we're doing next week as far as the show, and Memorial Day. That's not next week, right? It's a week after.
Yeah, a week after.
Memorial Day, I'm not doing a show on Memorial Day. I actually have a wedding that I'm going to. So I'm going to reschedule that. Everybody, I will let you know a little bit later this week what's coming up for next week. Captain Pearson, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. Before we go, let everyone know how to contact you if they want to book a trip with you.
All right. So I'm on Facebook. I do have a website, but it's not live. It should be live this summer, but just on Facebook, Pearson's Pursuit Fishing. Just type that in the search bar, it'll pop up. Send me a message. My logo also has my phone number in it. You can always call or text me, Facebook Messenger, and I'll respond to one of them.
Very good. And I will put the link in this video later tonight, so anyone can go in the description, get your contact information. And for the podcast, when that goes up on, around midnight Wednesday night into Thursday morning, I will also put it there. So reach out if you want to get a trip going in South Jersey. Thank you again for coming on.
You're welcome.
And everyone, I will catch you next week. Until next time, get out there, get on the water, and get some tight lines.